So we need to start making our match object. So we're going to need a prefab, match prefab. So the interesting part here is that we need two types of renderers: a mesh renderer for the text and a sprite renderer for the color. And an object cannot have both. So we're going to have to split this up into two parts. One part will be, so we're going to create a sprite, a circle sprite. So we go down here, I think it's down here. So make a circle sprite, right? And circle's fine. We're going to need to drag this out because it's not a prefab yet. You have to actually drag it out into the scene and back, and then that'll make it a prefab. You see, so there's no prefab options here. It's just a regular sprite. So yeah, just drag it into the game and then drag it back, and now it's a prefab. Okay, so the next thing we need is, as you see, it has a sprite renderer. The next thing we need is an empty. So we're going to make an empty, and we're going to call this one match. I guess we'll call it a match prefab. And we're going to give it a mesh renderer. So type it in, I think you type in text. Yeah, text. So text mesh. Okay. And as you see down at the bottom, we can set the size of this. The text. We can set the text. So where is it? Over here. And now what we're going to do is we're going to put these two objects together. So we'll take the circle and put it underneath the prefab, the match. And we could just reposition these a little bit. You can play around with that and get, it looks like it's white on white. So I'm going to have to change the text to black. Down at the bottom here, you have a color. And instead of changing the circle, because the sizes are off here, we're going to change the text size. So if you look at the options here, there's a weird thing you have to do here. If you increase the font, this was like a trick I found out. You have to increase the font size to like a big number, and then decrease the character size to a small number. It's really weird. So here I'm going to put in, what, 50 or something, right? Okay, 50. So it's nice and big. Too big, right? And now we decrease the character size to, let's say, 0.1 or 0.2. And this gives you a sharp number, sharp text. Okay, so that looks 0.15 looks like a good, and just reposition it, right? Reposition it so it's nicely centered. Okay, so once you think you have it, we have to drag this match prefab into the prefab folder, and that will make it into a prefab. Okay, so now we have the prefab. We can start working on some script here. So we need a match class. So match. And let's open that up. And so we need some variables here. The first variable is the color of the when it's matching or not matching. Yeah, and you can choose that. I chose green and red right now, but you can choose a different color, right? So that'll be, and it's static. Interesting about static is every match object doesn't need these two colors because they're the same for everybody, right? So we make it static. Static means they share that in the class. So every instance shares these two, right? So it's not duplicated or triplicated for every instance. The next thing is we need a reference to the text mesh. Um, because if you recall, this script will be on the circle. We could decide, it doesn't matter really where you put the circle, I mean, where you put the script, but because it works either way. But I'm going to put it on the circle, so that means I need a reference to the text mesh. If I put this on the text mesh, then I would need a reference to the circle. So anyway, it doesn't really matter. So the next thing we need for this match is we need its value, its position. We need to know what type is it. Is it a row or a column? And we're going to do a sprite renderer again, get a reference to that because the color will be changing often. We don't want to be retrieving that every time, so we want a reference to it. Okay, so let's do our initialization. So when on the awake, we'll get a reference to the sprite renderer. Remember, this is on the circle, so there is a sprite renderer. The script will be on the circle, which has a sprite renderer. And next we need an initialization function. So you're going to be given the position, the value, and the type, and we need to initialize those instance variables. And this is all. This initialization will be done in a level, and this will be passed through, so the match knows those values. So we got value, position, and we're going to set the color to the red at the beginning, the unmatched color. So that's why it didn't matter before that it was white when we made the circle, because we're going to change that color right now anyway. All right, I think we have the match done. So now we need to go to the level and we need to start making those matches, right? So we need a new function called initialize matches. We're going to pass in XML level, which is the level data that holds that information. We need a new function. So let's put it below the block and the group function. And let's start building this up. Just like the other ones, to organize this in a hierarchy, we're going to make a holder so all the groups, all the matches will be in one folder. We're going to retrieve the matches from the XML level, right? Just like we did the blocks and the groups. So that information is in the XML level. Let's get it out of there. And now we have that information and we just need to make the matches using that info. So we need to store those matches, and let's make a match array, right? So we can store that for future use. We also need a new prefab. We need the match prefab. So let's see, game object. It's not assisting me here. So let's go back and use caps. So we need the match prefab, and we'll pass that in later. Okay. So let's continue with this. So once we have our new variable, we need to instantiate it, initialize it, right? Instantiate it, and we'll give it the length of the number of matches. Now we're going to loop through all those matches in the XML, right? And we're going to initialize the match. So we're going to break this up into a new function. We're going to pass in all the information we need. We could have done it all here, but it gets a little cluttered. Because it'll be like 3 nested loops together. So we're just going to break this up into a function, pass in everything we need, right? And let the function return the match. So as you'll see, if you try to do this all together, it just gets to be, very confusing. So it's good to break these up sometimes. Okay, here's the function. So we have all the parameters we need, and let's start using them. So the first thing is from the XML match, we need to get its position and value. remember, we're trying to make a match here, match object, or yeah, a match object from the class. So we need the position and the value. We also need its type. So we'll get that from the XML match just as well. Okay, so now we need to know exactly where to place this. And the placement will depend on whether it's a row or a column, right? So is it below or is it to the right? So the position has to be broken down into two choices here. So the first choice, if it's a row, I'm going to declare a temporary variable here, vector2, and then I'm going to set it inside this if. So we're using the offset, we're using the gap. It's a little formula here. We need to know if we're moving it to the right of the blocks, we need to know how many sides we have. So this is in the scale and gap, and so there's a formula here, and we need to know the position. In this case, the position has to do with the x offset, and the y offset. Actually, the position on the first one is the y offset. So this will be up and down. And then the second one will be the x offset. The position will be used for the x offset. So it's either going left or right or up and down. So if you notice over here, for the x offset, we have the position. So that's basically the column. So which column do we want? So that's why we're multiplying position. Here we're multiplying the y by the position. Because that's a row, it's going up and down. Okay, so now we have the position. We can instantiate the object. So we're using the prefab, it's actually match prefab here, and V for the position, and it is a game object. So, okay, now we have the game object. And remember, this is the match prefab, right? So we'll scale it like the others. And we'll also give it a name using its type and value. And then we'll change the text mesh. So now recall, although the script, the match script is on the sprite, this object is the prefab. So technically, we can go right to the text mesh and change that value. And that's a one-time deal, right? You don't have to ever change that again. So we really don't need a reference to the text mesh ever after that. Okay, so that's why this is a little tricky when you have two objects, one inside the other, and where the scripts are placed. You have to be very careful. Okay, so we have the number on the text mesh, and now we need to do a couple more things. So we need to put it inside the parent, right? Because we want to organize all these matches. So the parent is being actually passed in, right? That's why we passed in the parent. If you notice, it's in a parameter list, right? We needed that. And I think the next thing we need to do is the colors, right? Is it the colors? Actually, no. We need to get, oh yeah, we need to, let's see, transform get target. We need to get the match script so we can initialize it. So the match script is on the child, which is the circle. So that's why we need to transform get child 0. There's only one child, and then we initialize it. So we never actually use the color. Okay, so that's the initialization. I don't think so. I don't think we use the color here. All right, so it looks like this is done. Let's save. And let's test it out, right? But I think before we tested out, we never actually added the script to the circle, right? So we never added the match script to the circle. So let's do that. There it is, match script. And we never added the prefab to the level. So it looks like I have a curly brace here to fill out. Another one here, XML handler, I think. Oh, I forgot to return. There was a return function. So I made the match, but I never returned it. See, so it was a return function, and you have to return the match. Okay. But I said, like I said, the last thing is we never, in the level, we never dragged the prefab, the match prefab into the slot. So we're going to have to do that. And also, I changed that instance of the object, but you have to override. So when you change a local instance, like I just did over here in the game, it doesn't change the prefab, the actual prefab. So I had to override that, and then we don't need the local reference. So if you're working like I was on the local, make sure you override. So let's go back to the game, and let's add that prefab into that slot. Okay, save everything, and let's go test it out. Okay, so there are those matches. The ones on the bottom could be a little higher, and here they are again, right? And they look a little off actually on the left and right. I have to look at those numbers, right? But the other thing is this is too big, so we have to change the scale. Maybe it's the scale. Go play around with that and get the position correct. But let me change the scale to 0.55 and see how it looks, right? To look at my formula. It looks like it's a little bit off. Needs to go down or up, so I could play around with that and come back to that. But that looks like it. You probably just have to mess around with the formula a little bit about the placement.